started here. We've got a lot of material to cover, and Sharon, who's normally here to advance the projector for me and keeps my speed going, if she thinks I'm talking too long, they start moving really fast all of a sudden, is on her way to Washington, so literally, not figuratively, hopefully figuratively too. Before we get started,
can you see?
I can see enough. I've got the light here. I think I can see enough to read it. We'll see how my eyes do. A couple of housekeeping things. One, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave Newhart, president of the Yellow Springs Historical Society. I think I know most everybody here, it looks like. I want to mention that we're going to have another public meeting on Tuesday night, April 24th from 7 to 9. It's our normal board meeting time anyway, but we, thanks to the generosity of Antioch College, have some space to consolidate all our various materials, including the archives from Antioch Book Plays, material we've collected over the years, material we'd like to collect, more we'd like to collect over the years. And it's in the basement of McGregor Hall on the campus. That's the building that's right by the on Livermore Street, next to the U that goes up to Antioch Hall. It's room 130. I've not been there yet myself. It's down in the basement, right?
Storage is in the basement.
But the meeting is not going to be in the
meeting will be on the first floor, room 130.
Oh, okay. And one of the reasons why we're having a public meeting is we would like to at least talk a little bit about the prospect of a public museum. Now, we're not thinking of some grand, huge building or anything like that, but we've not really had a museum. We've been collecting materials. The Yellow Springs has a wonderful history, and we'll see a little bit of that today, hopefully. And we just want to know whether anybody, we want to brainstorm a little bit. So if you're interested in brainstorming about the possibility of a museum sometime in the future, we really welcome you to that meeting. Again, it's Tuesday night, April 24th from 7 to 9. I'd also, before I get started, like to thank some people that have been very helpful. One, you can't do research in Yellow Springs without Antiochiana and without Scott Sanders. As always, he's a wonderful resource. Antiochiana is a wonderful resource, and I'll point out some of the photographs that I'm using today, courtesy of Antiochiana, and thanks to Scott's help. I also want to thank Don Hustler, who's not here today, but a Yellow Springs native who, for many years, was curator at the Ohio Historical Society and has a fascination with Yellow Springs history, and pulled, just hours and hours worth of work, pulling articles out of the Xenia paper and the Springfield paper, and some of that material has made its way in here as well. And I'd like to thank Bob Parker, who I don't think is here today. I didn't see him. Bob's walks in the Glen and seeing where some of these things were located are legendary. He was the first person that ever showed me where the Neff House was. Again, a great help to me and a lot of other folks as well. And then the last person is someone who's been not with us for many years, William Galloway, Dr. William Galloway, who was a Xenia historian who was relentless. Now his writing style takes a little to get used to because it sort of mingles things together, and it's like a conversation with somebody sometimes. But he did a huge amount of research, and his history of Glen Helen is a fundamental study. So with that, we'll take our trek back to the history of the resort, over 100 years of resort hotels in Yellow Springs. And this, by the way, we'll see it later, is a view of the Springs, probably about 1910. Where we're going to start off with is the Yellow Springs tract. It was often referred to as a tract of land that follows those borders. Here's the village of Yellow Springs, where it's located today, and what's today's Glen Helen. But this was the original tract of land that a man by the name of Lewis Davis entered into the land records. Now you read some of the histories, and the histories say Lewis Davis found out about the Yellow Springs by running into an Indian maiden in a bar in Dayton. That's probably not what really happened. In fact, Lewis Davis's father, Owen Davis, was an early pioneer in Kentucky and in Greene County. In 1798, he moved to what's today Alpha in Beaver Creek and built the first water-powered grist mill in Greene County, which he named the Alpha Mill because it was the very first one. Why we have the white spot in Beaver Creek known as Alpha today. And as this land was actually opened up, was surveyed, and made available for sale, Owen Davis, his son Lewis Davis, and his son-in-law Benjamin Whiteman moved upriver to the falls of the Little Miami, what today is Clifton, and built a grist mill there to take advantage of all that water power. So Lewis Davis, you know, had to have, nothing else, walked by the Yellow Springs on his way to his father's mill in Clifton, and probably no Indian maiden was involved. Yes, and people don't like to acknowledge it today, but Yellow Springs was founded on two things: tourism, real estate speculation. And Lewis Davis was a real estate speculator. I've looked at the index to the land records in Cincinnati. He entered over 100 different parcels of land in southeast Ohio, or southwest Ohio, excuse me. And at one point, he and John Paul, who was the man who laid out Xenia, actually bought land in Indiana and laid out a town that became Madison, Indiana. There's a whole long story about the later history of Lewis Davis that's pretty interesting, but that's for another time. So Lewis Davis probably bought this land not to build his solitary log cabin out in the wilderness by the springs, but because it already, at that point in 1802 or 1803, right about that time is when this was happening, had a reputation as a medicinal springs. I've not been able to find any hard evidence, but certainly the lore is that the Indians had used, Native Americans had used the springs for its medicinal uses, and it was known perhaps as early as the 1780s by the Kentucky pioneers who had come up in force to attack the Shawnee villages at Old Chillicothe, Old Town today, and at Piqua, which is just west of Springfield. So they probably knew about it, were just waiting for it to become available. Davis wasn't there for very long. In 1804, one of the first tavern licenses in Greene County was issued to a man by the name of Thomas Freem, who was leasing the Springs tract and built a tavern at the Springs. And in fact, in 1805, would become the first postmaster of Yellow Springs, even though there wasn't a town here. One of the first, really earliest post offices in all of Ohio. The first account we have of the springs and its medicinal uses was an advertisement or an article in a newspaper in Columbus in 1804. In 1805, we've got an account. And so 1805 is really early for this area, but and there's going to be several things I'm going to read to you. I apologize for reading, but it's really good to get the flavor from some of these old authors. And this is a journal of a man by the name of Espy, Josiah Espy, who traveled to the west to Cincinnati to visit some friends and family, and came up the Little Miami and was staying at a friend by the name of Mitchell. And Mr. Mitchell resides on the Little Miami about 45 miles from its mouth. He has a fine family of children, considering that they've been raised in the wilderness. During my stay at Mr. Mitchell's, our happiness was in great measure destroyed by the indisposition of my brother Hugh, who on the day I first met him at Thomas Espy's, another brother, complained of a slight attack of the rheumatism in his left knee. Here it became painful, almost to distraction. On the first intermission of the pain, and as soon as we could with safety, we started for the Yellow Springs, about 16 miles higher up the country, where we arrived on August 11th. These are 1805, remember. These are the most celebrated mineral waters in Ohio and beginning to be much frequented. They are situated about 70 miles north of Cincinnati and about 1.5 miles west of the Little Miami. The country around them is more hilly and less fertile than is usual in that state, but it may be considered as pretty well calculated for wheat. The Yellow Spring is a beautiful, bold, and limpid water issuing out of nearly the top of a hill about 80 or 90 feet high. The country back of the spring being nearly on a level with the ground on the top of the hill out of which the spring issues. Down the face of this hill, the water flows in rapid descent to a beautiful brook below, leaving a sediment or deposit nearly the color of the half-burnt brick, which has accumulated to an amazing size. It is indeed the greatest curiosity in the neighborhood. The face of the hill on projection, composed entirely of this deposit, is from 50 to 80 perches in circumference and is in its center, from appearance, 30 to 40 feet deep. From the small quantity which this spring deposits in 1 year, compared with the immense size of the mound, the man of science will find it difficult to reconcile the scriptural account of time of creation, according to common computation, with the number of ages it must have taken to produce this little mountain of mineral earth. To me, it is another evidence of the great age of the world and that biblical chronology has not rightly been computed heretofore. The face of the hill on which the sediment has been deposited appears incapable of producing much vegetation. The little shrubbery and red cedar are the chief which grow on it. I do not know whether any experiments have been made to ascertain the quality of this deposit. Typical pioneer here thinking how he's going to utilize the resource. But judging from its appearance, I should suppose a good paint, something in the nature of Spanish brown or yellow ochre, might be made out of it in such quantities as would be sufficient to supply the whole Western world. The water of the spring is intensely cold. It has not yet been analyzed, but is supposed to be strongly impregnated with iron, some think copper, and calcareous earth. And I have observed on its surface a dark oily substance in small quantities. Considering the intense coldness of the water and apparent hardness, it is surprising what quantities may be drank with perfect safety. It is usually operating as a diuretic, sometimes as a cathartic. It is now most used in rheumatisms and eruptions of the skin, and with great efficacy. The situation around it, yet nearly in a state of nature, is capable of the highest improvement, the beauty and convenience of the adjacent ground being almost unequaled. At present, the only convenient improvement that appears is 2 excellent shower baths, which are much used. My brother and I remained at the springs only 3 days, during which time he felt himself better, but on the day after he left there, the pain of his knee became excruciating, and he was again confined at the house of an old friend of our father's of the name of David Mitchell, almost 4 miles from the spring. He humanely prescribed some poultices from the neighboring wood for his relief. This has nothing to do with the Yellow Springs, but it's interesting anyway. These were composed of the pepper root that grows spontaneously here, which, being wetted with vinegar and applied in the affected knee, produced a most violent external inflammation in a few hours. This inflammation grew more angry for 3 or 4 days, eating away the flesh until it became necessary to apply healing poultices to extract the poison and fire. From that moment, the rheumatic pains began to abate, and he again set off for James Mitchell's, where we arrived on August 27th. So there we have it. And this is a later view of 1855 wall map, but this is what began as Thomas Freeman's cabin at the Springs and grew like Topsy. We'll take a little bit of time to get to the point where it is here. But I want to mention a couple of other early accounts, because the earliest accounts were this was a medicinal springs. In fact, that reference to Thomas Freeman getting the license in the Greene County records refers to his tavern being located at the Yellow or Medicinal Springs. In 1910, there was a publication called The Navigator, and it was mostly sailing or boating directions for the Ohio River and eventually for the Mississippi River, and where the bars were and where the ports were and so forth. But it also picks up little bits and pieces of the territory around it. So in 1810, 5 years later, after Josiah Espy's trip, this is what the navigator reports. It's been a place of considerable resort for several years back, having at some seasons from 100 or 200 visitations. That's in 1810 they're reporting that. At present, for a 12-month back, there have been no general accommodations. We're not sure why. Hence, the place is somewhat neglected, yet the property is about to be purchased from the present proprietor, General Whiteman, who had purchased it from Lewis Davis, by Messrs. Baum and Ferguson of Cincinnati, who seem to know the value of the spring and are determined to put it in order for the reception of visitations. Martin Baum was the first millionaire in Ohio. He was into, he had a store, he was selling to the flood of settlers who were coming into the state. He had a bank, he was a huge real estate speculator. He owned not only the Yellow Springs at this time, but he owned the parcel that became White Owl Farm, he owned the parcel that became John Bryan Park. He owned a lot of real estate up in this area. They also calculate on erecting light running mills on the water issuing from the spring. The quality of the water is diuretic, bracing and invigorating to the whole system, peculiarly beneficial to all nervous and debilitated affections. The most obstinate rheumatisms have been completely removed by them, and wonderful cures of old and new sores have been performed by applying a kind of jelly, as it is called, which is thrown out by the water to the parts affected. One case of a cancer in the temple of a woman was nearly cured, but she was hurried away too soon by her friends who lived at a considerable distance from the spring, so she didn't get the full effect. The water is drank plentifully and the shower bath is freely made use of, in which way it is highly strengthening and invigorating, throwing out immediately a general glow of warmth through the whole system. Interestingly, about the same time, in 1815, in a book which was really a travel guide to Southwest Ohio in Cincinnati, Daniel Drake, the pioneer doctor of Cincinnati, who was really a wonderful man of science and was the founder of what became the University of Cincinnati Medical School, is reporting on the springs. And he's a little more skeptical about whether it has any effect, but his comment is, well, even if it doesn't help the injured, it'll amuse the healthy. So, let's go forward. It's attracting, the resort is attracting people, probably, although it's a little hard to tell. I think this is where the original cabin was, right in this area, this view. Here's the springs down here. Along comes a man who just immigrated with his family from the eastern states to Cincinnati, Elisha Mills. In 1827, Elisha bought the Yellow Springs tract. In the meantime, although not really part of our resort hotel story, we went, Baum had tried to sell the springs to this group from Cincinnati called the Owenites, who set up a communist culture or a communist community at the springs, but didn't really, they weren't all into working with their hands, and it didn't succeed very well. And after about a year, they defaulted on their land contract, and Baum let them out. Baum was having problems of his own about this time, 1825, 1826. We had a big panic. He owed the government a lot of money for all this real estate that he bought. The government insisted on hard currency. There was no hard currency to be found in this part of the world at all. And in fact, his beautiful house that he had just built in Cincinnati was foreclosed on by the Bank of the United States. It's what's today the Taft Museum. It's still in existence, and he only lived in it a year or two. So Mills buys the springs and decides to turn it into a first-class resort, the first and only at that time summer resort in the state of Ohio in 1827, and we're still pretty early. And he started doing improvements. He added this further length. This is a big dining room he built, and this is this, I'll show you a map in a minute, but this is actually, you can see it sort of overhanging here. This is out to the edge of the cliff face, or hill face, that the Yellow Springs sits on. So here's the Yellow Springs sitting on top of its hill, and this is jutting out almost to the edge. This building that keeps going. And in 1829, his improvements were done. He started advertising all over the country. And I've got a newspaper in the back of the room on the table. A few other things if you want to take a look at them afterwards. But this is happens to be an 1829 news, the National Intelligencer, I think, from Washington, D.C. And it's got an ad about that long by William Mills on the wonders of the Yellow Springs and the new resort. And part of what he said in that ad is, in addition to the mansion house, there are, he modestly refers to the, there are 6 cottages of frame and brick, each 50 by 24, containing in all 48 rooms, calculated expressly for families. The dining room is 24 feet by 100 feet, so good size. A piazza, and all these hotel operators, all the way down to the turn of the century, when we lost the last one. Those aren't porches; those are piazzas. A piazza fronting the lawn. Fronting a mound of the Aborigines, that's the Order's mound, cedar groves, and the spring extends 200 feet and is presumed it is not surpassed as a delightful promenade by any in the Union. On the opposite front, is meaning the other side of the hotel, is a noble garden diversified with walks and shrubbery. The outbuildings are a billiard house, 2 9-pin or bowling alleys, separate bathing houses, spring house, ice house, etc., etc. Gambling is expressly forbidden on the premises and will not be allowed under any consideration. Of course, here's Mills, Elisha Mills, by the way, was a lawyer. And here comes the caveat. All games of hazard, skill, or exercise will be indulged only as innocent and healthful amusements. The spring is an ever-flowing fountain emerging from the highest point of land in the state of Ohio. Well, thanks to Antiochiana, we have this map. And this map is actually a later map, 1840s, after Mills, we'll find out, no longer is owning the springs itself. And I believe, Scott, tell me if I'm wrong, this is a copy of a map that belonged to the Neff family that William Galloway copied. So not having seen the original, we're not quite sure what, Galloway was a great historian of turnpikes and natural features and man-made features, and so we don't know what he might have added. But so here's Corey Street, here's today's Xenia Avenue, Dayton Street, and the Springfield Pike, Clifton Pike. Here you get a view of the gardens and that hotel. You can see how long it is. The Springs is right here. And so here, perpendicular to the Springs, is the big hotel. Oops. Here's the Order's Mound. Birch Creek coming in from this side, Yellow Springs Branch or Yellow Springs Creek coming in from this side, and the later railroad right here. Well, in Elisha Mills' tenure in the hotel was probably his high spot. It was a time in the late 1820s, 1830s when lots of folks from Cincinnati were Cincinnati was industrializing pretty quickly. It's down in that valley, really humid in the summertime. It hadn't really expanded to the hilltops yet. The wealthier people wanted to get out of town and in the summertime and be able to enjoy some cooler air, more relaxing atmosphere, and Yellow Springs was the place that came. And again, I'm going to apologize, but I'm going to read a little bit. And this is from an interesting book, which I don't know if I put it out there or not, if I didn't send the book back. It's called Tales and Sketches of from the Queen City by Benjamin Drake. Benjamin Drake was the brother of the Dr. Drake that I mentioned before, published in 1838, and a fairly scarce book. I had been looking for a copy for a long time. I found a copy, looks like a ratty, part of the cover, on eBay a year or two ago. I ordered this copy, get a good price on it, open it up. It's inscribed Julia Mills, Yellow Springs, Greene County, Ohio. And Julia was William's sister, Elisha's daughter. So it's pretty amazing. But this is I want to read this because it gives you a feel for what the times were like and what it was like coming to the Springs, and that's how it was generally referred to, the Springs, from Cincinnati to enjoy a summer week. The loitering clouds of a June morning, and this is a story actually about totally something different. It's about a grave at the bottom of Clifton Gorge of a lost French woman, but that's again another story. The loitering clouds of a June morning were tinged with the beams of the rising sun when the horn of the stage driver disturbed my slumbers. My trunk being packed, I was soon seated in a luxurious coach and moving onward at the rate of 7 miles per hour. The steeples and domes of the Queen City were soon lost in view as we ascended the valley of Deer Creek. That's basically where I-71 comes out today. An hour's ride brought us to the breakfast house, merry and hungry, even as the birds were singing and catching spiders in the surrounding woods. There was a delightful exhilaration of the spirits in stagecoach traveling, as a bracing air of a spring morning kisses one's temples, and he is suddenly whirled from the dust and drowsy hum of a city to the refreshing shades and Sabbath serenity of the country. Our party, 7 in number, were too polite not to do ample justice to the fragrant coffee and hot rolls that garnished the breakfast table. This necessary duty performed, we resumed our seats in so cheerful a mood that Sharon, Palmyra, and Lebanon, all more beautiful in name than in appearance, were successively passed without a complaint, even from the ladies, of the rough roads and occasional sloughs of despond over which and through which they were dragged. The sun was far down in the west when the twanging horn of the driver called out the dogs and the postmaster of Xenia, a village whose loitering population and quiet streets gave evidence of more content than commerce. The departing rays of a brilliant sunset were upon the tops of the old oaks that rise around the Yellow Springs when the stage reached that romantic spot. As we drove up to the door, the eyes of a numerous company of visitors were turned upon us. So just picture that. Picture the stage pulling up to this hotel. Some were sitting on the piazza, others sauntering to the spring or promenading over the green turf of the lawn in front of the hotel, all awaiting with philosophical patience the welcome tinkle of a huge triangle by which the major domo of the kitchen cabinet was wont to announce that the tea, chickens, and pancakes were on the supper table. After breakfast the following morning, there was, as usual, a general conference of the ladies to select the best means of killing the forenoon. After a copious flow of small talk, the Bluestockings retired to their respective cottages to pore over the new novel and the last review. Those of the single sisterhood, whose code of ethics embraced flirtation as a pastime, rambled to Lover's Lane and Pompey's Pillar, or sought the evergreen and the wild rose on the bristling cliff. So we know it was being referred to as Pompey's Pillar in 1838. A third and less sentimental class accompanied the followers of old Isaac Walton, down to the West Branch to angle for fish, or crossed the lawn for a game of 9-pins, while those opposed to locomotion sat down upon the piazza to cards and chess. The gentlemen, as is their wont, attached themselves to the ladies and partook of their sports and their rambles. It goes on a little bit, then it says, independent, however, of the curative power of this water, a summer's visit to the Yellow Springs has many charms. The region in which it is situated is cool and healthful, being elevated near 1,000 feet above New Orleans, and it has wild and romantic scenery with cliffs and waterfalls, babbling brooks, and flowery prairies, and the pleasant villages of Springfield, Xenia, Dayton, and Clifton with an afternoon's ride. he goes on to tell about his day as they're taking a ride with the ladies over to see the falls of the Little Miami and see Clifton Gorge and how his fellow riders are spending most of their time trying to attract the ladies. But it gives you a feel for what it must have been like. Well, and here, this just so get your layout here. This is again from the 1855 wall map. Here's, you can see again the long building of Mills's Hotel, railroad, which would come in later, college, and the village. In December 1841, though, the things changed. And for reasons that are not quite clear to me, although it may have had to do with money, Elisha Mills sold the Yellow Springs tract to a man by the name of William Neff from Cincinnati. And Neff was a wealthy pork packer, I mean porkopolis, and he bought it as a summer home, although we'll see over the years it sort of went back and forth. It was his summer home, but his friends came and stayed. He allowed his friends to build cottages, and in fact, at some points it appears that he actually had managers come in and admitted people to stay, or probably on a paying basis. We're not really sure. So exit the Millses from the hotel in the Springs. Elisha Mills moved upstream, built a new house, and would build another hotel, and we'll see that in a few minutes. I just want to go through these pictures. These are from Antioch, Indiana. It's a part of an amazing series that were taken by a Cincinnati photographer in 1865, so a little bit later, but it gives you a great idea of what the place looked like at that point. Unfortunately, I told Scott, I wish they'd cut down some of the trees because it's a little hard to see in a couple of places, but that would have defeated the purpose. This is 343 today, that entrance to Glen Helen from the north. This is the lane back to the Neff house. By probably about, I get different dates, but by the end of the 1840s, by 1850, there is a, thank you, there is a new toll road. By the time when the railroad came in is the reason, there's a new toll road from turnpike from Yellow Springs to Clifton. And it had the grandiose expectations, I guess. It was the Clifton, Yellow Springs, and Byron Turnpike. But it had been moved away from what had become the Neff house, and it's basically today's 343. In fact, Ron Schmidt and I are working on a tour for another purpose, and I was doing a little bit of research, and the two old stone bridges that 343 go into Clifton on, that you walk by on your way to the gorge, are probably the original construction from that turnpike in about 1850. So this is looking south into the Neff property. Notice there's a telegraph line right there. Now here's the end of the Neff house in that long rambling. We're calling it the Neff house now because the Neffs own it. I mean, what Mills really built. And right at the edge of the cliff, the hill, here's the Yellow Springs and Little Yellow Springs house. You remember the view from the map? It looks almost exactly the same structure. The piazzas. Supposedly, before it was sold, William Mills, the son, got married and built some kind of their first house after they got married in the 20s at this end of it, but I'm not quite sure how that worked. Here's another view This is looking uphill from the springs. You can see the length of that hotel. Looking back, you see how the hillside slopes there. What's amazing to me is if you walk on the trails through that part of the Glen today, you know, there's virtually no trace of any structures. There's some of those cottages, the brick and frame cottages that the families lived in. And I've got a number of pictures that this is part of that series, but of people enjoying the property. You see how fairly manicured at that point, on top of the cliffs. This is later. This is from, and no, you shouldn't be standing on here, but this is from an 1894 photograph album that I found, and it's just of views around Yellow Springs and Clifton. It was taken by a young man who was traveling through this area, then went up to northern Ohio and took pictures up there as well. But he later became a professional photographer in Springfield, so his photographs are good. But again, it shows you enjoying the scenery. Here with the Cascades. This stereo view was taken by the same photographer that took that group we saw before, and this has got a tax stamp on it, so we know within 2 years it was taken 1865 up to the middle of 1866, someplace in there. This is the old stage road to Clifton, and the stone bridge. It's now the road to the Outdoor Education Center from that same 1894 album.
So that preceded the turnpike, is that right?
That preceded the turnpike, and the turnpike sort of gave them a straighter route, and they didn't have to go down into the river and so forth to get freight from the mills at Clifton to the railroad at Yellow Springs. That's really why that turnpike was built. Another one of the views from the 1865 series of photographs. This was used, I don't know, maybe Scott you know, but this was definitely used later for a billiards parlor.
That's correct.
With the new Neff House. Whether it was used for the old Neff House, the old Mills House as a billiard parlor as well, I don't know, but there it is today. It's the only building that really survives from that era. It's really a treasure. Well, let's go back to, we've got the Neffs owning the Yellow Springs in 1841. The Millses are out. Part of this may be that they were already, the two Mills, Elisha and his son William, were already thinking about their grander ideas, like starting a village, laying out a town, laying out what in their minds was going to be a city. And in fact, by 1843, William Mills had built his house in the center of land west of the Yellow Springs Creek, which had been swamp. I mean, he talks about in the spring you could walk through 2 feet of water where this house was built, but it would become the center of Yellow Springs. And his father had built a house, as I said, for himself upstream, up Yellow Springs Creek from the hotel, right at the ford of the stream. And this is, and he claims, or at least William telling the story afterwards, that his father was pushed because he was such a famous hotel manager to turn this, now that the Neffs have the springs and are limiting people coming into the springs, that we need another resort hotel. And so Elisha Mills expands his house and turns it into a hotel, resort hotel by the name of the Yellow Springs House. And the Yellow Springs House was a public house, as we'll see, for 60 years. Here's another view of it. My guess is, does everybody know where this is?
No.
Where the Bryan Center?
This is where the Bryan Center is. It was, this was Dayton Street, and Xenia is coming into it just before, this is before it was all reconfigured like it is now. And there was the big hotel sitting up just basically where the high school is now, or where the Bryan Center is now. And then down lower, closer to the creek, is what they call the cottages, a string of cottages that face the creek.
That's
Going
where the
towards
murder
the
happened.
That's right.
Going towards the amphitheater, that's
The
right.
amphitheater would be where the cottages are, or towards.
So down this, yeah, a little bit farther down that way.
And then the railroad mislocated in the back then.
Well, I think their perspective was a little bit, it's really sort of coming down the side, but right, because that way it looks like it's going that direction. But I think their perspective on these things was, yeah.
These people wouldn't have had access to the Yellow Springs, though.
Well, at times they didn't, at times they did. At least later on, it seems clear that the Neffs allowed the people who were staying here to move up, walk upstream and hike. And in fact, I think the Neffs really, at various times, allowed a lot of people to use their grounds, even if they had people staying there. I found one account where Antioch students were complaining because they'd always been allowed to picnic on the grounds. And one year, during the Civil War, when they were having a lot of people staying there because a lot of generals' families or officers' families were living here, they wouldn't allow them to picnic, and that was a big to-do. This is just to give you a perspective here. This is Dayton Street. Currently, 68 would come through, Xenia would come through right about here. In this section, if you stand on Dayton Street, about in front of AC Plumbing, and look towards 68, it sort of makes a turn there by the train station. But if you look in the yard, the front yard of the Bryan Center, you can see still today where basically this is, where it was going straight towards the creek. It crossed the creek down here very low, and was today 343, the Clifton Pike, coming in along the side of the hill. And this was, it went down so far and then back up the hill out towards our place that I think in the early 40s is when it was, they cut off the top of the hill at our place and filled all this in down here. Those are some big trees coming through. Here's another view of the cottages down below. There's roughly the same place as the Bryan Center today, or a month or two ago when I took the picture. Some of the stonework, I can't quite make all this out as far as what's what. It would be an interesting project to try to match it all back together with what purpose it served. Here's a view. I don't know, Scott, is this in your collection? Because I only have a photocopy from someplace, and I don't have a record of where it came from.
Yeah, we have a print of it.
Okay. Here's
Maybe you got it
the
from us.
Yellow Springs house facing out towards Dayton Street. Here's the cottages and the creek and a bridge that's been built across the stream. And look at this little U-shaped structure. There it is. The road crossed. This was probably built as part of that same construction of the Clifton Turnpike. It's somewhat similar in construction, and where so this is looking towards Glen Helen from those cottages we just saw, where Springfield crossed the Springfield Pike crossed the Yellow Springs Creek.
That
And
would
this-
be US 68.
This is 68 today. This is the Springfield and Xenia interurban car sitting there, and you can see here's roughly the same place with the fill that's there today that raised the whole thing up. And this has nothing to do with the hotel, but it's when you're back there, this is one of the great unused resources of Yellow Springs, and that's the the WPA period
When
amphitheater.
is that? Where is that?
Right behind the Bryant Center,
When?
down over the hill in the Bryant Center.
When
When?
was that built?
I think it was, somebody else may know, I thought it was built in the 30s,
Yeah,
but
34, I think is right. It's a 3Cs project.
3 Cs, okay.
Civilian comes.
435,
Four,
36.
okay. Well, there was a big
Which is
CCC
part of
camp
the-
here, yeah.
WPA.
Well, the interest, a couple of things about the Yellow Springs House while we're talking about it here, before we get off of it. Just so, it went through, after Elisha Mills, it seemed to go through a lot of different managers and owners through the 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s. I mean, it survived, but some years it wasn't open for the season, some years it was. It seems like every couple of years somebody new was managing it. Scott just sent me an article from the Cincinnati Commercial recently in 1869, which was the Cincinnati Reds, probably one of the most famous seasons of any baseball team of any place in the United States. It was the first all-professional baseball team, and they were undefeated. They barnstormed across the whole United States. Well, one of their intended games was against the Antioch baseball team, and they took the Little Miami up from Cincinnati, and it was pouring. The article talks about how hard it was raining. They got to Yellow Springs. They decided no baseball game today, which is probably a blessing for the Antioch team. And they instead went to the Yellow Springs house and had a special dinner. And then they called or telegraphed, I suppose, down to Xenia for a train to take them back. And so they sent a special train up to Yellow Springs and picked up the team and took them back to Xenia, and they went up through the rest of Ohio. They did actually play that year, though, didn't they?
Yeah, it was a practice game. They'd already played that game.
Okay.
So
And got-
they were waiting for the one to count.
And they got rained out, you know. So there was a whole series of owners, and in the 1890s, they whoever owned it at the time, sold the Yellow Springs house to a man by the name of Clark, who had lost his grocery business in the big fire, in the 1890s fire on Dayton Street. And so I guess he decided he was going to get into the hotel business. And there, about that same period, they put in something like $20,000 or $25,000 of work on the hotel to renovate it. And hopefully we'll, whoops. Well, we may find in a surprising place where the photographs of that are, but in any event, he made a go of it, apparently not very successfully. About the turn of the century, it was sold to a man by the name of Weekly, who decided to turn it into a home for, a retirement home for Methodist ministers, retired Methodist ministers, basically. And in 1802, it burnt, and totally burnt. And after the fire, there was nothing left. A man by the name of John Bryan bought it and gave it in 1916 to the village of Yellow Springs for school district. And there's another story. So let's go forward, or let's go backwards actually to the 1850s, to another resort. So we've talked about the old Mills Hotel or Neff House, the Yellow Springs House, now the water cure. And the water cure was this interesting concept. I think Scott's given a program before, so I'm not going to go too much into what they did here. It was hydropathy or water cure. I mean, the idea was that pure water, cold water, hot water could be used for a medical cure. It was a time in history when there were a lot of different things being tried medically and different ideas being sorted out. It was contemporary Dr. Graham, who I think was into water cure, but also came up with this great flour for a cracker that was a health food when he invented it, the graham cracker. So this group from Cincinnati, about I've normally seen 1850 as the date, although occasionally I've seen 1848 as the date when this was built in the southern part of Glen Helen, not far from the railroad, but on the east side of Yellow Springs Creek. So the opposite side of the creek from the railroad. There was a big spring on the Yellow Springs side, the western side of the creek, and so they had piping, wood piping that they bored holes in that took the water from that spring, got enough velocity going downhill towards the creek that it would then run back up, and they could run these fountains and have the water that they needed at the water cure. And originally when it was built, I think it was just the center section and this section, because there's an account in 1852 of the north wing being built. It would hold about 60 patients when it was built. When it was enlarged, it was about 100 patients. Yeah, it was owned by Cincinnati. It was Cincinnatians, and it went through sort of a series of doctors that were operating it. They talk about having a bowling salon, a gymnasium, swimming pool. Interesting, the daily and weekly rates, you were charged extra if you didn't bring your own towels. Here's another view from one of their circulars of the Yellow Springs, or of the water cure. And I'm going to read a little bit from a letter from Antiochiana from 1853. I say this is a resort, but when you hear this, question whether it was how much of a resort it really was. So this is a lady who's staying at the water cure in December of 1853. Life at the cure now is rather monotonous. There are only 4 patients here now. Doctor says it is invariably the case in the winter. How much I would like to write you a long, interesting letter, but my head aches so bad, underlined. I am now taking pack sheets. I have taken one every day for a week in the afternoon, 40 minutes, basically wrapped up in wet sheets. I have never got warm in one yet. The doctor says they will finally be beneficial to me, even if they do make me worse for now. If it was not for this hope, I would not submit to the packs. They are so unpleasant. Sponge bath in the morning, sitz bath at 10 a.m., 75 degrees, foot bath at 7 p.m., 90 degrees. I am very unpleasantly situated for writing. I don't know what kind of a letter this will be. I am in the sitting room. Mrs. Cheney, the wife of the doctor, is talking at her usual rate, which is not slow, I assure you. The children are playing, which is very confusing as well as annoying. She does not feel it. Now I am interrupted again by the dreaded ring of the bath bell. Well, I have just returned from the bathroom as cold as ice and resumed my pen. The children have gone, but Mrs. C interrupts me occasionally. Ellen, the bath nurse, tells me I have a dripping sheet this afternoon. You know how well I like that. Dr. Cheney, this is typical Dr. too. Dr. Cheney thinks that it might almost as well I leave now as to leave in less than 10 weeks. It is so necessary to remain that long, but I know I cannot remain more than half that long. He reduced my board $1 so that it will be $4 per week, as cheap as I could ask. He does not oblige me to play weekly. And then she goes, how are the folks all getting along out there? Does the Bloomerites still wear their costume? I wear mine yet and expect to until there is a greater improvements made that I shall adopt. I want to see you all, but I have no desire to go home and would not for 6 months yet if I could remain that long, for I know it is absolutely necessary. Dr. Cheney would ensure me a cure if I would stay that long. I am bound to stay as long as I can. Dr. Cheney says I am the coldest subject he ever saw. So there you go. The big story with the water cure happened in 1856 when it was sold actually to another doctor in Cincinnati who proposed to lease it to a couple of interesting folks, Dr. Thomas Nichols and Mary Gov Nichols, who had been into a lot of different things in the East and had moved to Cincinnati and were in Cincinnati for several years. They were accused of believing in free love. If you read their circular for what they were, the community they were starting at, intended to start at the Water Cure, it was New Age, I guess is the best way to do it. It's really hard to figure out. Memnonia was the name of it, which was named after a singing statue on the Nile. And it was, everybody gets together, it was this, and has, you know, lives a higher life, I guess is one way to describe it. But Horace Mann didn't really believe in this, and he went ballistic when he found out about it, that these people were going to be so near his college students. And so he started a war trying to keep them out, trying to get people in Yellow Springs to buy the Water Cure establishment so they wouldn't be leased. They got into a big war of words. And it sort of all went to nothing eventually because they were there for about a year. Then in a, I don't want to say a dream, but they did seances and that sort of thing too. The spirits came to them and told them to join the Catholic Church. So they left and went to Cincinnati and joined the Catholic Church. And you wonder why Yellow Springs has a reputation. The Water Cure operated basically more as a hotel than anything else, than an actual water cure towards the late 1850s. Moncure Conway reports staying there at one time. And in 1862, it burnt to the ground, and that was the end of it. As far as we know, yes, I've maybe seen one other drawing of it than these two, but I've never seen a photograph of it, and so to my knowledge, there isn't, it was never photographed, although one of these days we'll find it.
Do you have any idea where it was in relationship to the Conway cabin?
To the Conway cabin, here is where it is. Here's the college, it's down here. It had its own stop on the Little Miami Railroad, a small station, and that station supposedly was right where Grinnell Road comes out onto Corey Street, more or less, or crosses the bike path, which would have been the railroad.
Yeah.
And then it was a winding path that went down into the glen and then back up, forded the creek and back up the other side to the Water Cure. So not all that far from where the Conway cabin was. Okay. Now, at the beginning, I thanked a lot of people. I want to thank these folks who I don't know much about, but this is on the back of a stereo view. And Gano and Clark, photographers from Yellow Springs, G.W. Large, agent at Yellow Springs. And this team in the perhaps as early as the late 1870s, but certainly in the 1880s and the 1890s, probably for the tourist trade, were photographing things all over this area, down at Ghost Station, the powder mills, the Yellow Springs, houses in Yellow Springs, the resort hotels, what's now the Glen, what's now John Bryan Park, Clifton Gorge. So they took a lot of different photographs, and I'm sure there's a lot more out there we haven't found yet. But some of these photographs we're going to see now came from them. And in particular, they did a series called Scenery on the Neff grounds. And probably sometime in the Civil War, because I think it was the Yellow Springs house was being used during the Civil War. The Water Cure was being used in the early part of the Civil War as a hotel. And the Neff house was being used as at the Springs was being used as a hotel during the Civil War, and was fairly full, we think. And so some of these Cincinnati folks, businessmen who were up there, started thinking that, well, maybe there's a way to make some more money, and maybe we should, this old-fashioned hotel, maybe it's time to really, move into the 19th century and build a big resort like we're being talked about and built in the mountains in Virginia and in upstate New York and in Michigan, roughly the same time. And so they put a group together in 1869. Finally, there was although there had been a company formed during the Civil War. In 1869, there was a big meeting in Yellow Springs. A lot of important businessmen and names you know, probably from Cincinnati, some from Dayton, from Springfield, from Xenia, came together, and the idea was to raise $100,000 in bonds. The Neffs were going to borrow, the Neff brothers now, it's the next generation, William and Clifford, were going to borrow $100,000 and build a genuine resort hotel at the Springs, and they were trying to get these guys to subscribe to it. And it's, let's see if I can find this. The Xenia Gazette is reported on this meeting, and I think they thought they'd got about $80,000 raised at the meeting from the people that were there, and the Gazette is trying to promote this idea. And, everybody who's wise and good, wants to do something good for Greene County should subscribe to some more bonds. And in telling the virtues of this plan, they quote a man by the name of Nathaniel Willis, who was a really popular author in the United States before the Civil War, magazine writer and so forth, who apparently visited Yellow Springs in 1860 and, as the Gazette reported, once declared while sojourning at the Yellow Springs that the scenery thereabouts were more picturesque and lovely than any spot in Italy or Switzerland. He must have been down at the bottom of the gorge looking down to see the mountains or something. Yellow Springs, the village council, in one of the first efforts at promoting economic development, subscribed to the last $3,000 of bonds that were needed to make the $100,000 in 1860, somewhere of 1869, and so they started work on this gigantic hotel at the Springs. The Neffs ended up putting in supposedly maybe as much as $100,000 of their own money into it as well, because it was so expensive. And it was finished in less than a year. It opened in the summer of 1870. And just the contractor, by the way, was a man from Cedarville, who also was the contractor who rebuilt after a fire the Clifton Mill, the structure that's still there today.
Dave, was this to replace the original Neff?
In fact, the original Neff house would get torn down about the same time. Because it was old-fashioned, and this was, you didn't need it. And well, listen to some of these statistics. 300 feet long, 45 feet wide. The length of the porches, when all added together, were 780 feet of porches, 20 feet wide. The drawing room was 45 feet by 72 feet. The dining room was 45 feet by 150 feet. The kitchen was 50 by 85. It was a whole wing. That back wing was the kitchen wing. There were 6 ladies' parlors on the first floor, 4 stories. You can see 6 stories in the center. There was a promenade on top that you could go promenade on. 240 sleeping rooms. Each room they had a manufactured gas plant, so each room had gas. As they said, no fluid lamps any place in the thing. And each room had water, which was fairly modern for 1870. And a wardrobe, a large and convenient wardrobe in each room. It was heated by steam, and at the very end there were 300 employees or 300 workers working on it. It mentions, the article that this came from said the old barn is to be converted into a billiard room. A 9-pin alley is in contemplation, 30 by 118 feet. So I think that's the barn that's sometimes referred to as the Neff barn that I showed you the photographs. There was an elevator. The people had, the patrons had to walk upstairs, but there was an elevator in the office for taking luggage up to the stairs, and there was a Western Union telegraph operator there 24/7. And there was this 200 feet away is the saloon, in the first floor of which is a bar with the choicest liquors and cigars, 5 billiard tables upstairs, adjoining is a 10-pin alley. And I don't know what the difference is between 9-pin and 10-pin. You see references to both. And so, 1 pin, okay, yeah. It takes a lawyer to figure that out.
David, I think a 9-pin is a diamond-shaped configuration rather than a triangle.
Oh, okay. Maybe mathematically has to.
Well, 3 across in the middle, and then 2 and 1.
Okay, okay. The laundry is one of the most convenient of its kind we've ever seen. The clothes being washed and dried by steam, the power and heat being furnished by an engine located conveniently to but outside of the building. Just below the spring, a steam engine is located, which forces water into a huge tank from whence it's carried into the bath and into the room. So it didn't look like it did today when this thing was there. There were plans, although it's not clear that they were ever acted upon, to build a lake at that point, because up until this point there was no lake in the Glen. Well, let's just take a look at some pictures of the Neff House, just to show you where it is. Now this, remember, the old Neff House was perpendicular to the springs, or to the creek. The new Neff House is parallel, and you can see it right here's this is 343 Clifton Pike. Here's the entrance from the north. And here's the new hotel. This is from the 1874 Atlas. And remember, the old one was going that way. So here's the view from a distance. It was hard to get it all in a picture. It was so big. And you can see the promenade up on top, and the towers. See how big that thing was? It was made from, William Carr was hired to saw timber for the frame, and then the siding was white pine that was brought in from probably Michigan by railroad. Now this is probably after it's no longer being used. It just looks pretty sad. This is the back of the room. I found this at the Cahill auction a few years ago, and it was sort of cheap because it was really, really thinly silver plated. Now here's a picture of the springs from one of the stereo views. You see the pillars. So this may have been taken, I can't tell if that's a building there or not. This may have been the old Neff House before it was torn down. And the new Neff House is back there parallel to the creek, top of the hill. Again, no real trace of any of that. Some of the patrons enjoying the view. I just wanted to mention something I got here. The problem with the new Neff House, it was that it was a disaster almost from the beginning. Before I tell you about the end, I want to say one more thing about the beginning. This is from a little brochure telling about the wonders of the new Neff House that was put out in 1871. And remember, this is at the Yellow Springs here in Ohio in Greene County. And it's going through the list of reasons why this is a great place. 6, the temperature of the park is cool with almost a constant breeze during the heated term, meaning summer. While there may be a few days which from 11 to 5 may be called hot, still with the going down of the sun, a marked change is felt, refreshing and invigorating. While to sleep without blankets is rare. Of flies there are but few, and mosquitoes none. And is pronounced by all one of the most healthy spots known. I think the writer must have been someplace else. But in any event, this really was a disaster. It never, and there were some management problems, but they really missed their era. And with the railroads, they thought, well, people will want to go here from Cincinnati because they can keep in touch with the city, their businesses in the city, they can run down the train when they needed to. But people were going to the mountains, or they were going to the lakes, lakeshore, up to northern Michigan, and so forth. It just was never successful. It went into foreclosure pretty quickly. And in fact, William C. Neff, the son of the original Neff here, bought it for just pennies on the dollar in the early 1870s. And by the 1880s, it was early 1880s. It was closed, and I think some of those photographs may have been taken when it was closed. And by 1895, they tore it down and shipped the lumber to Cincinnati, sold what they could, and eliminated any trace. So it was a short history, but it was a huge hotel, Paul Nelson. Just the reason people came though is because of the scenery, and I just got a few older photographs of the Cascades on Birch Creek, which would have been behind the hotel. It's from that 1894 album. People stood in there a lot, in the creek a lot. This is one of those Gano and Clark photographs, and my guess is it's taken in Yellow Springs. This is the railroad siding. You can see the Glen is back over here, because of the way the configuration is. And they're either, tell me whether they're loading or unloading lumber. It's not labeled on the back. I'm guessing this is when they tore down the Neff house and they're hauling it to the railroad to ship it to Cincinnati. But it could well be 1869 when they're going the other direction. And although I don't think very many of these stereo views are that early, where it's going the other direction. It's pretty cool with the ox team and the lumber on the railroad. It may have nothing to do with it because it isn't labeled. But. Well, where does that leave us? That's the end of the resort hotels, really, with the burning of the Yellow Springs house in 1902, and with the tearing down of the new Neff house in 1895. But the Neffs tried again. Theodore Neff, the third generation, bought the property from, I think, the estate of his father in 1902 with the idea of opening up a scenic and recreational amusement grounds. And Neff Grounds Park was what came of it. He built a dining hall at the springs. He built a dance hall at just outside of Yellow Springs. In fact, this is right about taken sort of right across from the Ha-Ha's or the railroad would be sort of over in here. And this was a stop on the Urban, so you could go to the Neff Park. And you look at this sidewalk going back to the dance hall. Here's the sidewalk. This is from a postcard, probably about 1910. See that kink in going back to the dining? This was a couple months ago. So,
That's down by the sewer lift station.
yeah, it's up, but it's not down that low. But, it's not up as high as we are. But and there's the dance hall, Neff Grounds Park.
What year?
About 1910. 1902 was when he opened this up. He also built a dam. Clark, a guy named the grocer that ran the Yellow Springs house, had built a dam in the 1890s on Yellow Springs Creek to back up basically to the Ryan Center where it is today, so that there'd be some scenery for his hotel. That apparently had gone out, and then this, there was a new dam built by the Neffs.
Was there a mill there?
There may have been a sawmill really early on, but not with this dam. This dam was purely for recreational. So this is looking at that dance hall on the peninsula with where the lake was. No lake anymore, obviously.
But the lake was created by the dam.
Lake, yes, the lake was created by the Neffs Dam purely for recreational purposes. As you can see here, people out enjoying it, their fancy hats. These are the pillars that are still there under where the dance hall was. Another view. This is looking across the lake towards the other side in this boathouse. Another view. See the picnickers on the. Some of you may have known Kenny Campbell, who was on the board of the Historical Society when I was on the board of the Historical Society. He tells of being a kid and taking sleds and opening the doors on the boathouse, riding down, and the idea was to get enough velocity that you could go all the way through and out onto the ice on the lake, which, question how safe that was. Here's another view. This is why Yellow Springs lost out. Boathouse and bathing beach.
Is that horizon line there, is that 68?
No, I think the boathouse is on the other side.
Other side, okay.
Yeah, opposite the dance hall.
Okay.
And a picture about the same time of the Yellow Springs. No new Neff house, no old Neff house. I think this is probably the dining hall right there. Neff grounds, Cascades keep going. And sort of to wind all this up, in I think this was actually the first year, 1908 is sort of to catch the fad. 1908, 1909, they held up the Neff grounds, and in 1910, 1911, 1912, they were held at the college. And then 1913, 14, and 15, they were held back at the Neff grounds, and originally started by Professor Fess from the college, was the Chautauqua movement, and it was bring people to the resort. Chautauqua, New York became a resort village through these sorts of things, but this was more of a few-week type of thing, a tent Chautauqua, these are a couple of views of them putting up the tent for the tent Chautauqua, the years it was at the college. There's the tent. Tent. This one's 1912, so towards the end. There's the program. They bring in speakers and musical groups and try to attract people, and I think it worked well for a couple of years. And in 1914, Theodore Neff, the third generation, sold 104 acres, including the Yellow Springs, to Town Carlisle. Town Carlisle built an auditorium at the Springs for the Chautauqua, but maybe the land was finally getting back to him because get back at the uses for this because after 2 years, a big oak tree fell down and smashed it and destroyed it. In 1916 was the year that John Bryan gave the Yellow Springs House property to the village for the schools, and he also bought from Town Carlisle the Glen and or the Yellow Springs tract, and so that's then brings us into the story of Glen Helen, which is for another day. This is basically the old Neff grounds, the water cure property down in this area. In fact, think on this map, which is on Glen Helen's website, there's a photograph or a picture of the water cure. So that gives you an idea of where it is, Grinnell Road. And of course, the Yellow Springs and all the things around the Yellow Springs.
You can see some sort of earthware pool type things down near the creek there. Was that part of the water cure?
Yeah, they had also, they claimed they had 50 springs and fountains and water areas. So here's yet another view of the springs as it's lasted through all these things, occasionally being redecorated along the way, and of course the current version of the springs and the Cascades and Pompey's Pillar. And I want to finish up with one of the stories that I didn't get a chance to mention was when Elisha Mills opened up his resort, and he had, despite his prohibitions on gambling, he did have some things like 10-pin or 9-pin, whichever it was that he had, and there were shooting matches. In fact, based on some of his stories, it would be interesting to take a metal detector and run through some of those big oaks out there around the springs, because they were used for so many years really early on for shooting matches. And the apparently there were a group of Scots-Irish really strict Presbyterians who moved into the area around Massey's Creek and Clark's Run, sort of that area south and east of Yellow Springs. And they didn't like the idea of what Elisha Mills was doing here, particularly on Sundays. And so they went to the county prosecutor, who was this enormous man called Big John Alexander, and convinced him to prosecute Elisha Mills. Well, Elisha wants to make a big deal about it, so he goes to this young lawyer in Lebanon by the name of Tom Corwin. Tom Corwin would be known as the Ohio Wagon Boy. He served as senator. He was supposedly one of the best public speakers in the country at the time, and was really into humor and so forth. And so this is the recreation at that point, to come and see this trial. And it's going to be this wild trial over Elisha Mills and whether or not he's going to be able to continue his resort, and or whether they're going to shut it down. It's going to be the end of Yellow Springs, and there's lots of fireworks in front of the jury, but Tom Corwin prevails, and Elisha Mills Resort can go on. And so William Mills, who had sort of a sad end period of his life, living in Kansas in 1873, he wrote this. He wrote a series of articles in the Xenia Gazette about early Yellow Springs. Excuse me. So he said, but talking about the efforts to shut down the hotel. But destiny ordered otherwise, and thousands upon thousands in the Miami Valley have enjoyed many a merry season there since. And if the isolated rocks in old Pompey's Pillar could reveal the delicate secrets of Cupid's artful wiles in that heart-confiding, lovely retreat, what crimson flushes might yet mantle the still fair cheeks of many an honored, excellent dame. How sweet their memory still, but I won't expose what the rocks refuse to tell. Let the singing cascade ever murmur on her soothing melodies of the delightful and happy past. May untold generations rise up and call the place blessed. Any questions? That's the end.
It does make you wonder how much of what we have right now will be here in 150 years. I hope this spring's still running.
Yeah, and what people will be looking at, trying to figure out what exactly they did back in 2012.
You'll have your museum to show you.
Well, hopefully so. Hopefully so. We'll try to preserve for the next generation. So, well, sure.
I think you referred to the Owenites as pre-communists. But I think you meant utopian communist.
Yeah, that's,
And since we were 35 years.
that's
before
right,
Marx,
they weren't, that's right, they weren't
Before Marx.
red communists. like
They
that.
were communists, or utopian.
Communalists, or, yeah, communalists is the term.
But you used, I think you used the
Communist,
communist.
I might have said
Congress,
secretary.
certain form of industrial democracy where the workers had a say in how the enterprise was run. Sort of like our ESOP today.
Apparently, part of the problem was, though, they had all bosses and no workers. Big part of the problem.
Which is not uncommon in utopian societies.
But there's refreshments in the back, and again, don't forget about the meeting on Tuesday if yes, we do.
If anybody would like to join today, it's $5 for a senior, $10 for an individual, and $15 for a family. Thanks.